I did not know that Japan was trying to land on the moon.
No, first I heard of that was when I heard that they hadn't manned it.
They launched it 4 months ago. It launched December the 11th, 2022, and only just got there now. Yeah, exactly. And it was launched right after, I guess, Orion was launched.
Yes, December last year had been Orion.
Yeah, well, this was December the 11th.
Perhaps they were hoping to hatch a lift.
They said it just took the long tour so it could take some photographs of the Earth.
Oh, that's nice.
And the one link there shows the animation of the photographs of the Earth. The one that says iSpace, just open that up and take a look at how many different sizes the Earth gets to be.
Depends what camera you're using.
Well, these are animations because there was nothing outside of this thing to take a selfie.
That would account for it, yes. Okay.
But their depictions of the size of the Earth is dramatically different.
You know what it tells me? It tells me that it's not as easy as they think it is. It's not as easy as they make it out to be.
That is true.
This is stuff that's just in the news again on the faking. If you look at the one that says moon landing hoax,
yeah,
this guy is just new on the scene. He just started writing, I guess he writes fiction. I read through it quickly, and basically he did a copy and paste off of Apollo Altimistivo's site or either Phil Plait when he was copying it down, because if he had done any research before he wrote this article, he would have at least had yourself and David Percy in there and a few other people in Bart Zabrell. He didn't have any of that. He just Bill Casing, the waving flag. They fully were protected from radiation because they all were well protected by the materials in those vehicles and in the suit. And that they also went when they were avoiding high periods of radiation.
As for the radiation belts, NASA scientists knew about them before the Apollo missions and took steps to minimize the astronauts' exposure. The spacecraft were equipped with shielding materials, I don't know what shielding materials they're talking about, that protected the crew from most of the radiation, and the Apollo missions were timed to avoid periods of high radioactive activity or radiation activity.
Every one of those statements is false, because from 69 to 72, we were in a fairly high level of CMEs to start with. And of course, Apollo 16 was within a week of a real severe one. You can't find any documentation on radiation protection for the suits or the craft. And the fact that they knew about the Van Allen belts were there, they knew nothing about them compared to what happened in 2014 with the Van Allen probes discovering the plasma shield and the impenetrable wall that is out there.
Here we go back to these telescopes and radios again. Moreover, the moon landings was witnessed by millions of people around the world, including astronomers, journalists, and ordinary citizens who observed the events through telescopes or on television. The radio signals from the Apollo missions were also tracked by a network of radio telescopes around the world, providing independent confirmation of the spacecraft's trajectory and position. Where is it all then? Where are these guys? Why aren't they coming out into the open?
We should invite this guy on the show. I mean, he writes pure fiction. This guy wasn't even born when David Percy wrote his book. If an article does not include yourself, David Percy, Bart Zabrell, if it doesn't include statements that they've read through everything on the Ollis site, they should have a listing of the number of books that they've read on the subject. And then let's get a little up to date and get Randy Walsh's book in there and Trevor Weaver's books in there. The fact that they've watched all 512 videos on the Apollo Detective site.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to do that somehow. It's basically just a cut and paste job using the standard no stars in the sky, waving flags, all that stuff. And as you say, it's interesting, he only mentions Bill Casing as being the person who started it. Well, he probably did start it. But a lot of people have picked up the baton since then. What about Jarrah White's work?
Never mind us. There's a ton of work out there.
Yeah, there is.
Coming from other countries.
Well, Xavier Pascal in France was doing some very good work.
Exactly.
Being a computer scientist, he knew what he was looking at. And he wasn't impressed by it.
You take a look at all the authors on the Ollis site with PhDs. that are writing those articles.
Yeah, Phil Coots has done a series of articles. They're worth reading. I mean, that was done about 10 years ago, the first one. Then you've got good old Taffy in Thailand. He's done some interesting work. He's upset a lot of people, which is a good thing.
One of the biggest obstacles that we have when we're talking to people and when we're presenting stuff is the fact that people have wanted to explore forever. And from the first time the Wright brothers got off the ground, you have to go higher and faster and higher and faster on it. Then the movie industry hit, the silent movies. What were they doing? They were trying to portray man on the moon.
One of the first films ever made was that.
The imagination was there, the desire was there to achieve this goal. And when it came up at the end of the Second World War, the rocket technology, they thought they had the rockets to do it. And that's why they're still working with the same type of rocket. Then you have the challenge and start of the space race to get to the moon. Well, first it was a space race, and then the president decided that he was going to make it to the moon, right? Yep. Even before that, by 1950, you already had Disney involved in creating those images, creating the desire. Look at the stuff from 1950 on with Woody Woodpecker and stuff like that, right? And then what does NASA do? They must have realized already at that time that they needed to have their own movie production studios to do their own simulations.
Which they did.
And now they've got 21 production studios, movie production studios. And you can go and look up and see what movies they made. Where are the films that they produced? They're in association with Gravity and a couple other ones, right? The Martian. But there's so much money in those studios. They must be producing something. So what are they producing? Felix and Paul Studios, there's the ISS right there in a nutshell. And they haven't stopped. I mean, that $3.5 billion for a zero-gravity simulator is going to be something else.
It could be rented out to Hollywood to produce their latest space travel films.
Oh, absolutely. But what is NASA using it for? It's not for training.
No, it's to show that they've done it.
That's right. And when they get good enough, will we be able to detect it?
We can only detect it from the story they build around it.
They already have the advantage because the desire is there.
Because there are certain aspects of space travel which cannot be duplicated in a studio. The radiation on humans and the vacuum on humans and on equipment. You start putting equipment into a heavy vacuum, a hard vacuum, 10 to the minus 12, that's around the moon, that's a hard vacuum. What effect does that have on the outgassing of metals? Because metals outgas the same way that liquids do. It's just it takes a much harder vacuum to do it.
And a little longer for it to happen.
Yeah.
But any man-made materials always have a very serious problem, because when we're producing them here on Earth, you have atomic oxygen and other things absorbed into the material when it's being made. Even when they use a vacuum to cure the materials, right? It's still present there. You take something like glass, it's off-gassing. My God, what's going to happen to your windows after a while?
They disappear.
Yeah, and then, I mean, never mind that the radiation isn't going to help.
No, that's not going to help.
You know, like the coming right through the windows themselves. And like I said, you take that young writer there, I mean, we should just bring him on the show and say, oh, you show us. Like, you're treating us like whatever, and you don't even know who we are. You write an article on there and going, oh, we're just stupid. It's all been debunked.
It's just a rehash of a previous article.
Like I said, it looks like he did a copy and paste from Palto Altavistimo or something like that.
Or the Institute of Physics article. Remember that one?
Yeah.
It's the same sort of thing. It's just copy and paste from some other group, and he put his name on it. So yeah, be interesting to invite him on. That Japanese craft that crashed near to the moon, I reckon they had the same problem as the Israeli craft. Remember that? The Bereshit, 2018, the Bereshit craft from Israel got all the way to the moon and then crashed. My suggestion was that they examined the the engine mounting that they had 3D printed. Now, if that started to get weakened by the hard vacuum, that would be why it would crash. Maybe the Japanese craft had exactly the same problem. It's interesting, it happens just as it tries to land on the moon, it goes haywire.
I am in the position, because of all of the lies and the nonsense that they've produced, I don't think anything has gone near the moon when it comes to it. They launch it up into whatever, and whatever happens to it after that. 4 months to get to the moon.
Yeah, but the other thing is, Scott, I mean, I don't have a problem with that personally, because there's no way I'm going to put $22 million onto a SpaceX rocket just to send it off into the ether and then not have any result. That's an awful lot of money to spend. So I'm looking at it and I'm saying, yeah, these people are trying, these countries are trying to get those craft there, but why aren't they getting them there? I mean, the Japanese, are you kidding me? The Japanese would have been the first ones because of the technology that they had. Look at the radios, Nippon Gaki, Nippon company. They were putting out quite a lot of products in the 60s, electronics. I mean, Sony was too, granted. But these satellites and these things that are coming from Japan or China, I mean, they would, if they can't get anything on the lunar surface, then something's wrong. And this is, to me, is the same story, whereas it's very difficult for them to get anything up there. Never mind put a man on there and try to get them to the lunar surface. Yeah. These guys can't even get a spacecraft there, not even a probe, and they're crashing. And you're right, same thing with Israel. In its last phase, bang, lost contact.
The 4 months it took to get there means the average speed was 86 miles an hour. And then if you look at the detail on it, it went into orbit at 100 kilometers, which is 60 miles. So it has to be traveling at 6,000 miles an hour to get that orbit speed. If it's going to go 86 miles an hour on an average time frame, it's going to have continuous power to keep the speed up, because it did not reach escape velocity. Like, it can't just coast there.
I mean, escape velocity is 25,000 miles an hour. Escape velocity from Earth.
Yeah, but that's the rocket. That's the ship on the rocket, so it's going to go. That's not a problem. It's getting it there, orbiting it, and then landing it. That's where they have the problem. It's landing the thing. It's trying to get it down.
And same thing, the Israeli craft had that problem. The Japanese craft have got that problem. I wonder if we're going to see America have the same problem when they try to get something down onto the lunar surface. From the lunar gateway, you know, that ISS in lunar orbit. I mean, it makes no sense, because 50 years ago they just fired a big rocket, a Saturn V rocket, got the thing into orbit around the moon, got their craft down onto the lunar surface, walked around for a bit, got back in again, fired it back up again. It was all so simple 50 years ago, but they can't do it now.
Not nearly as well as one might think. For someone who may go down in history as one of the same page as Christopher Columbus, on the same page. I mean, in the Gallup poll conducted last Tuesday and Wednesday nights, only 50% of the public named correctly Armstrong as the first person to walk on the moon. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Only 50%.
Yeah.
Some thought it was John Glenn. Some thought it was Alan Shepard.
28% couldn't come up with any name at all.
No, it's interesting when you start looking at it, how little it's known about. I mean, how many people could tell you what the Pentagon Papers were about? Or the House Select Committee on Assassinations?
Did they actually plan the assassinations? Or did they review them?
Both. Well, nobody really cares about the moon landings today. That's what it seems like. I mean, the Americans, you'd think, would be right up there, but they don't seem to care much about any of this.
That's the only part of the Apollo missions that remains the same.
Yeah.
The reverence to the flag. It's pretty interesting that you can motivate an entire nation over a single image.
But these articles, they never end.
They keep coming up with it, and it's like they have copied and pasted the same information. They start with Bill Casing, they go on with the waving flag, and then shadows, and they're pretty much done. And they don't have anything. They need to bring themselves up to date with the stuff within the last 20 years. or even the last 5 years, which really shocked them. Just the stuff we've been doing will shock them, put a stop to their nonsense. The problem is that it's not that they don't see it, because when they get angry, it's because they can see it.
And they don't like people contradicting their belief system.
Well, because it cuts into their educational system as well, because of being taught misinformation. They started at a very early age public school, teaching it to indoctrinate these people into that, but they continue on through the universities with the same stuff. And these people come out with a PhD that has no value to them because they're not viable in the workforce with the information that they were taught.
That's true, yeah.
Physics girl comes to mind all the way. She is just a parrot for them. They taught her to be a parrot, and she's not bright enough to know the difference. If she actually studied physics, realized what she was saying, how could she not know if she was an actual student of physics?
Because she only studies things that are supposed to be the correct things to study.
Right. But to sit there and display a formula that is completely just incorrect, is just off the wall incorrect, it just astounded me. And that's being supported by a team from MIT, which means none of them know the difference, or they wouldn't dare post that, because the rest of the world can see it. And I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about other universities and their students. They look at that and they take a glance and go, who the hell is she?
Which is why what Raza said the other day on his chat, that nobody in China believes that America has landed on the moon. It's remarkable.
Well, that's the same as Bill. He said you can't find anybody at the universities over there that believe it. They think it's a joke. By the way, another person who is sliding off the scale, disappearing, is Amy Sherritt.
All right, yes.
She hasn't posted anything within the last year.
Oh, it's title. Amy Sherritt title.
It's all a matter of pronunciation, isn't it? She's been encouraged by the wrong people. And she's going to be looking at a bit of a, shall we say, a bit of a fool when these come out. Because eventually all this is going to come out. The whole moon landing thing is going to come out. Because until America lands on the moon again, allegedly, for the first time, we're going to believe the Apollo story. If they can't make it back to the moon with 21st century technology, who's going to believe they could do it with 20th century technology? Nobody. They'll all say, oh, look, they faked it.
Well, the thing that we're looking at right now is even the Apollo rockets, at least they lifted off the launch pad. I don't care how they did it. You imagine 50 years later, with all of the technology, the computer technology, the guidance systems, everything else, all the thermal controls, like all the sensors that they can put on a machine to control it. You just see Elon Musk sit there and say, well, we had another run.
Yeah, that Elon Musk launch, the Starship, was just a repeat of the Russian N-1 rocket.
Yeah.
50 years ago. That blew up.
Yeah. With all those engines there.
Yeah.
But even Apollo, they did have the technology to put together a missile to get it off the launch pad, and a very large one at that.
Yeah, and they did it, what, 13, 14 times?
But it didn't destroy the launch pad.
No, lumps of concrete flying off everywhere.
Didn't destroy the launch pad, didn't do that, and they successfully launched the thing every time repeatedly, and nobody's even doing that today.
Because they're not using the same type of rocket. I mean, don't forget that rocket was designed by Wernher von Braun, who was quite a genius at designing rockets, as was Sergei Korolev. Once those two died, Sergei Korolev in 1966, Wernher von Braun in 1977, rocket launching was sort of a bit of a problem.
You'd think they would have the data to study. They think they would have it recorded enough, the knowledge to be there. But quite obviously it wasn't, because what happened after Apollo? The US started using Russian rockets.
Yeah, and because they lost all the technology. Remember that comment by Don Pettit?
And it is lost.
Yeah.
Not that it worked to get to the moon, but it worked better than what they've got now.
Yeah. It doesn't work. And have you seen any of the data from the Artemis program about the radiation readings that were being recorded by those two crash test dummies?
I went looking for it. I can't find any data. You take the last 50 years. Where's the advancement in any rocket technology? They had to use Russian rockets. Now Musk is using methane rockets. Instead, they don't seem to work any better. Okay, but they keep claiming that they've got more power in this, and like even NASA going, well, we made rockets, now they're upgradable, right? Now we can get them up to 500,000 a piece, right? Just let's see one launch. Instead of having all these extra engines, just put one on at 500,000 and let's see it launch, right? They don't do that either.
Yeah, because that would spoil the story.
You realize what Musk launched, there's no payload on there. That's just that and the fuel.
It didn't get very far, did it? Was it about 30 miles up? It blew up?
39 kilometers.
That's what, 25 miles? It's halfway to the Kármán line.
If you look at Apollo, hit so-called 42 miles, and it was, 6,700 mile an hour?
Yep.
Right? And this thing was like 22 or 300 mile an hour and burned all of its fuel up in 2 minutes.
Yeah, wrecked the launch pad when it took off.
Well, Robert's got the shot of that when the big cement block going through the back of the car.
I saw that. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that's wild. And you can actually see the stuff going out into the ocean. I mean, like that stuff was traveling.
Yeah. Well, it was a powerful rocket when they launched it.
Well, it's not just the power of the rocket, it's the expansion rate of the fuel as it burns exceeds the speed of sound. So I didn't look up to see how much methane, the actual speed that it's running at when it's burning. I mean, the reason why a rocket goes 17,500 miles an hour is because that's the speed that the fuel's running out of, that they're burning. That's the expansion rate. Like a car, you put your foot on the gas and when the engine hits red line, you're done, right? You can't go any faster. Well, you got to have the fuel like that. And if anybody says that that isn't so, you take a look at the other versions that they're trying to do where they were using a nuclear generator to superheat the fuel so that it expands faster as it's being burnt to get up to faster speeds. Right? They want that expansion rate to be faster to push the vehicle, right? That's the one that they say that they needed a nuclear generator that could power the entire UK. The vehicle's going to be 6 miles long or something like that. Yeah. And all of it's just going to be for fuel.
It's a bit sad, really.
Yeah.
The fact that nothing has really changed very much since rockets were first launched back in mid-1940s, when the V2 rockets, they were the first rockets, designed by Wernher von Braun, and they used liquid fuels, and they were quite good. Some of them blew up, a few of them landed on London. And then they just developed the V2 rocket into bigger rockets, the Jupiter rockets.
All they did with those was just the amount of fuel and time, how long they're going to burn at, and just let them fall out of the sky, right? They were just, it's not like they were smart bombs or anything.
No.
Like that.
But nothing has changed.
The V2, would they hit 400?
Yeah, something like that.
Oh, buzz bombs, because they had a little propeller on the back when they dropped to try to make sure that they nose down, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what exploded when they hit the...
I mean, basically that was cruise missile. And then they developed the rockets. They were supposed to be developing another one. The V2 was the one that hit London. And they were developing a V4, which is more powerful, that was supposed to hit America. Trouble is, they never got it off the ground. And they've been trying to get rockets off the ground ever since. It's almost like they're going backwards with their technology.
It's like a lot of things, right? You can design a rocket for a particular size and power for the thing, and it'll work quite well. If you take and you make the thing larger, it doesn't react well. And of course, the airplane industry is a prime example of that, the amount of testing. You just can't take the design of a small aircraft and say, okay, well, let's just make it bigger.
Yeah, that's true.
It doesn't work. And I understand that with boats. You can have a perfect design on a boat, say it's a 16-foot boat, and the hull design is perfectly. You can't take that same design and say, oh, let's make it 20 feet. Just expand the dimensions of it, because now it doesn't work right on the water. It's quite different. And the rockets are exactly the same way.
Quite different. But NASA doesn't seem to know that.
They're finding it out. Like even the guidance systems that were set up for Musk on his tests there, right? Those guidance systems would have been tested on a smaller rocket.
Yep.
And he just transferred those guidance systems into a larger rocket. Then the weight changes. And you saw what happened. As the fuel went empty, the top part of the rocket, the center of gravity goes higher and higher and higher on the rocket. Then it spins around. Now the guidance system can't control it. If it was on a smaller rocket, the guidance system probably could control it because the weight differential being on the top there wouldn't have as much of an effect. And then of course the length of the rocket comes into play as well, right? That same effect that you saw there would be the same effect that the lunar lander would have as the fuel tanks became used up and there's less and less fuel in there. The lander itself, the Apollo lander, would have become very top heavy.
Yeah, very top heavy.
And the reaction would change. If Neil's in there operating those little retro rockets, it might be okay at the first when the weight is at the bottom of the machine, when they're descending. But when it's at the top, it's just going to flip. And there wouldn't be enough power in those retros to do that. And they never tested that. The flying bedstead that goes up was sitting there. The fuel tanks were all even below and nothing above them. He's sitting wide open, sitting in it. First of all, he's sitting in a chair, not standing. The weight distribution of the machine couldn't even control it the way it was. Can you imagine if they put a huge load on top of it and have it flip around like it's going to do the same thing? They never ever tested that. The amount of testing that would take would be unbelievable. And of course, never having flown it before, the likelihood of any of them flying the thing successfully would almost be impossible. And of course, each time they win, it's a different guy flying it. So for him, it's the first time. And nobody ever thought about that. And some of them, you can't even find any training on it. Like you can find the training for Neil did the testing on the flying bedstead, but you don't see the other guys.
Yeah, exactly. It's like having a co-pilot on an aircraft who's never flown that aircraft before.
Buzz Aldrin.
Well,
he's the lunar module pilot.
Yes, he was supposed to fly the damn thing. And he couldn't. He wasn't trained to fly it.
I can't find any documentation on him. There's no video on him flying it. And you don't see anybody else flying the flying bedstead. Just Neil. Don't forget, you've got 60 guys that were being trained.
So where's the evidence? They could say there were 60 guys being trained.
Well, they got the list of 60. You can read that they were there. They were all part of it, right? And they got the 60 guys all had time to practice with the cameras. Right? They all got Hasselblad cameras and stuff to work with, but you don't see them doing the other training.
And you don't see the films that they took with those cameras either.
Well, you see more of them doing G-force training and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's true.
There's more documentation on that kind of thing. And stuff that they did in the water in case they were in the thing, because they had the life rafts and everything else. They're doing that just in swimming pools, right? To inflate the raft and stuff like that. Those 60 guys were doing that kind of stuff. And they had to make at least 60 spacesuits because they were individually made for each person, right? Those they did. But you don't see them on the other equipment. You don't see anything on a simulator because if one of those guys got sick, somebody else has got to take it.
So much missing, so much information missing, which you would expect to be there. You know, if you're going to train people to do a particular activity on a spacecraft, you'd expect there to be records of them being trained to do it. Because Al Bean, commander of Apollo 12, he was supposed to be able to fly it, but Pete Conrad couldn't. He'd never been trained. So
you don't see any training of either of them. Not in the flying bedstead or anything else. You just don't see it. That's the other thing when you're looking at it. I've got the documents on their training schedule on there, like a calendar with the dates and stuff on it.
Yeah.
And it names the alternate 3 people, like the backup team are there in the training, because there's 8 or 9 months of the training in there, and you only see the other names added in there for the alternate in a few months. You'll see them named that they went to this seminar, they went to that. They all went for the cameras. They all went for a full dress simulation in their spacesuits to practice in the spacesuits. You don't see them in any of the simulators. Any of the major photographs, you only see a few of the astronauts that claim to have landed on the moon. And that's basically Apollo 11, 12, and 15. Yep. Those are the ones in there. You'll see a little bit on 17 as well, with Cernan and Schmidt. You don't see the rest of them in there. You don't see much on 14 or 16. Yeah. They seem to have disappeared in the woodwork when it comes to that. You can't find as many videos of them or photographs of them training.
I mean, once you start picking apart the Apollo story from a purely common sense point of view, you just don't find what you expect to find. NASA have got a real problem because they're desperately trying to maintain the fiction of Apollo. And they're also now trying to get back to the moon using the technology of the 21st century. Maybe they will.